The shuttle-carrying ambassador approached the Nexus station with the kind of silence that comes before storms. She sat alone in the passenger compartment, watching the ancient structure grow larger in the viewport. The station had been built by a civilization no one remembered, discovered intact and empty 12,000 years ago. Now it served as the heart of the Galactic Council, a massive crystalline sphere that caught and reflected the light of nearby stars until it looked like a jewel floating in the darkness. Was 43 years old, chosen for this role because she spoke 12 alien languages and had spent most of her adult life in space. She had represented humanity in trade negotiations, border disputes, and cultural exchanges, but she had never been summoned to a full council assembly before. No human had. The message had arrived 3 days ago, delivered through official channels with all the ceremony such things required. Ambassador was to appear before the assembled council to answer charges against humanity. The nature of these charges would be revealed at the hearing. She was permitted to bring no staff, no legal counsel, no recording devices. She could speak in her own defense, but the outcome had already been determined by council law and precedent. Her superiors on Earth had been optimistic at first. Humanity had only been part of the council for 3 years, barely long enough to make any serious mistakes, but as dug through the diplomatic archives, that optimism had died quickly. The docking procedure took 20 minutes. The station's systems were old and particular, requiring specific approach angles and communication protocols. When the airlock finally opened, stepped into a corridor that seemed to be made of solid light. The walls glowed with a soft blue radiance that came from within the crystal itself. 2 guides waited for her. They were tall and thin, with skin that shifted through shades of green and blue depending on the light. Neither spoke. They simply turned and began walking and followed. The corridors of the Nexus station were enormous, built to accommodate species of all sizes and shapes. Had read that the original builders had been massive creatures, though no one knew what they had looked like or where they had gone. She felt very small walking through these halls, her footsteps echoing in the vast spaces. They passed other representatives heading in the same direction. A crystalline diplomat floated by, its body made of interlocking geometric shapes that chimed softly as it moved. A group of aquatic rolled past in their mobility spheres, having urgent conversations in their clicking language. A massive lumbered along on 6 legs, each footfall shaking the floor slightly. None of them looked at, none of them spoke to her. The council chamber was unlike anything had ever seen. It was a perfect sphere, easily 200 meters in diameter, with seating arranged in concentric rings that rose up on all sides. The center was empty except for a single podium that seemed to grow directly from the floor. Above it all, suspended in midair by no visible means, 3 shapes of pure light slowly rotated. The arbiters had seen images of them before, but the recordings didn't capture the presence they had in person. They were beings of thought energy, ancient entities that had existed long before most spacefaring civilizations. They didn't speak with voices, but communicated directly with the translation devices built into every seat in the chamber. As entered, the murmuring conversations throughout the chamber stopped. 847 species were represented here, ranging from single organisms to hive minds connecting thousands of individuals. All of them turned their attention toward the human walking across the floor. She reached the central podium and stood behind it, keeping her hands relaxed at her sides. She had worn a simple black suit with no decorations. Earth's diplomatic advisors had argued about this for hours, some wanting her in military dress to show strength, others suggesting traditional clothing to emphasize culture. Had chosen simplicity. She wanted nothing to distract from her words. The arbiters pulsed with light, and their voices filled the chamber through every translator at once. Ambassador of the species designated Homo, native to the planet designated Earth, third planet of the star designated Sol. You stand before this council to answer charges of violations against the Accord of Civilized Conduct. Do you understand the proceedings?" "I understand," said. Her voice carried through the chamber acoustics perfectly, reaching every ear and auditory organ present. "The charges will now be read. You will have opportunity to respond when evidence has been presented." What followed took 4 hours. Remained standing throughout, watching as prosecution after prosecution took the floor to present their cases against humanity. The first charge involved the Arcturus incident. 2 human research vessels had ignored quarantine protocols around a dying star, entering the exclusion zone to collect exotic particles from the stellar collapse. The vessels had been unmanned, controlled remotely, but that didn't matter under Council law. The quarantine had been established for safety reasons, and humanity had violated it deliberately. The second charge concerned dimensional research. Human scientists on a colony called Nova Kyoto had been conducting experiments with quantum-level reality manipulation, technology explicitly prohibited by the Council's research accords. The experiments had been detected by Council monitoring systems. The research station had been shut down, but the violation was recorded. The charges continued. Humanity had established colonies in 14 restricted zones, areas designated as protected by the Council for various reasons. Some were habitats for endangered species. Others were sites of historical significance. A few were simply considered too dangerous for colonization. Humanity had moved into all of them anyway. Human traders had violated economic regulations 46 times in 3 years. Human explorers had crossed into territories marked as off-limits. Human engineers had reverse-engineered Council technology, breaking intellectual property agreements. Each charge was documented with evidence. Each one was irrefutable. Didn't bother trying to deny any of them. She simply listened and took notes on a small tablet. But it was the 18th charge that made the entire chamber fall silent. A crystalline prosecutor rose to present it, its facets catching the light as it spoke. The species Homo has made unauthorized contact with entities designated as the Devourers. This contact occurred 8 months ago, standard time, when 3 human colony vessels entered the void zone and transmitted communication signals toward confirmed Devourer territory. The vessels were destroyed. However, telemetry recovered from their data cores confirms that contact was intentional and planned. This represents the most serious violation of the Accord in Council history. The chamber erupted. Representatives from dozens of species began shouting at once, their translators creating a cacophony of angry voices. The arbiters pulsed with red light, and a harmonic tone filled the air, demanding silence. When quiet returned, one of the arbiters spoke directly. "Ambassador, you understand the severity of this charge. The Devourers are a threat that has consumed 17 galaxies. The Council has maintained containment protocols for 10,000 years. Your species has endangered all known civilization." Met the arbiter's gaze, though it was hard to look directly at the being of light. "I understand the charge," she said calmly. "The penalties for each violation have been established by Council law," the arbiter continued. "Technological regression for unauthorized research, orbital monitoring for territorial violations, economic sanctions for trade violations. These penalties are cumulative and have been applied consistently across all member species for thousands of years." Another arbiter took over the speech. "The penalty for contact with the Devourers, however, has never been invoked. The protocols state that any species making such contact represents an existential threat to galactic civilization and must be dissolved." "Dissolved," repeated. "You mean genocide." "We mean the cessation of technological advancement, the dispersal of your population, and the gradual absorption of your culture into other civilizations," the arbiter said. "Physical beings are not harmed, but the species as an independent entity ceases to exist. Combined with the other 17 violations, this is the only possible outcome under Council law. The third arbiter spoke now. You have been granted 1 hour to offer defense or explanation. This is a courtesy extended to all accused, though we inform you that the verdict has been determined by precedent. Your words will be recorded for historical purposes, but they will not change the outcome. Do you wish to speak, or do you accept the judgment in silence? Looked up at the three beings of light, then let her gaze sweep across the assembled representatives of 847 civilizations. She saw curiosity in some faces, indifference in others. A few looked sympathetic, but most seemed satisfied with the verdict. Humanity had broken the rules. Humanity would face the consequences. This was how the Council maintained order. She thought about Earth, turning in its orbit around Sol, home to 8 billion humans who would never see the stars again if this judgment stood. She thought about the colonies, spreading across 60 systems, filled with people trying to build new lives. She thought about the children being born in space stations and domed habitats, who would grow up as prisoners if the Council had its way. Then she thought about those 3 colony ships that had gone into the void zone, crewed by volunteers who knew they wouldn't return. They had gone anyway. They had faced something the entire Galactic Council feared to even name, and they had heard it. Placed both hands on the podium and leaned forward slightly. I wish to speak, she said. The arbiters pulsed with acknowledgement. You may begin, Ambassador, 1 hour. Took a breath, and then she asked the question that would change everything. How many of you remember your first contact with hostile intelligence? The chamber filled with confused murmuring. This was not how defenses were conducted. Accused species were supposed to offer explanations, show remorse, promise to follow Council law in the future. They didn't ask questions of the Council itself. One of the arbiters pulsed with annoyance. Ambassador, this is not relevant to the charges against your species. Please confine your remarks to the violations as stated. It's completely relevant, said, her voice steady, because every species in this chamber faced that moment. The moment when you discovered you weren't alone in the universe, and that some of those others wanted to destroy you. How many of you fought? How many of you ran? How many of you survived only because you got lucky or because someone else intervened? She pulled up a holographic display from her tablet, projecting it above the podium where everyone could see. It showed a timeline, stretching back thousands of years. The collective first achieved space flight 4,000 years ago. Within a century, they encountered the Empire, which immediately declared war. They lost 60% of their population before the Council intervened. The crystalline assembly discovered faster-than-light travel and promptly flew into devourer space. They lost 3 entire colony fleets before they understood what they were facing. They fought a civil war that nearly destroyed there before they learned to cooperate. Enough, an arbiter interrupted. These are historical records, they prove nothing. They prove everything, said. They prove that every species here has made mistakes, terrible mistakes, mistakes that cost lives and nearly ended civilizations. But you're all still here because the Council protected you. You joined the Council, you accepted its rules, and those rules kept you safe. She paused, letting that sink in. Humanity hasn't had that luxury. The hologram changed, now showing Earth's solar system. We evolved on a death world. Earth has had 5 major mass extinctions that we know of. 99% of all species that ever lived on our planet are gone. We survived not because we were strong or fast or had natural weapons. We survived because we were stubborn, because we adapted, because when something tried to kill us, we figured out how to kill it back. Expanded the image, showing humanity spread into space. When we finally reached the stars, we were alone. No one came to guide us. No one taught us the rules. We built our first interstellar ships using theory and guesswork. We lost crews to radiation, to ship malfunctions, to pure bad luck. We made contact with 6 alien species before we ever heard of the Galactic Council, and 4 of those first contacts turned violent. The hologram showed battle footage, human ships fighting against alien vessels. The quality was poor, recorded by emergency systems as ships died. We fought when they tried to claim our colony on Tau. We fought the pirates who raided our trade routes. We fought because no one was coming to save us. We had to save ourselves. A representative activated its speaking device, the sphere it inhabited glowing with bioluminescence. This is not defense. This is explanation of aggression. You admit your species is violent. I admit my species is surviving, said. When we finally discovered the Galactic Council 3 years ago, we were thrilled. Finally, we thought we'd found civilization. We'd found order and law. We'd found protection. Her voice hardened slightly. What we found was a cage. That caused another eruption of angry voices. The arbiters pulsed again for silence, but continued speaking over the noise. Let me address the charges specifically, since that's what you want. The Arcturus incident. Yes, we sent unmanned probes into a restricted zone. Do you know why? Because the exotic particles created by stellar collapse are necessary for a form of faster-than-light travel that doesn't require your hyperspace lanes. We were trying to develop independent FTL technology. She pulled up schematics showing complex engineering diagrams. Your hyperspace lanes are controlled by the Council. You decide who can use them and when. You can shut down any species' ability to travel between stars with a single command. We saw that control, and we decided we needed an alternative, not to threaten anyone, just to ensure our own freedom of movement. A crystalline representative stood, its facets shifting colors with agitation. The hyperspace network is maintained for the safety of all species. Independent FTL technology leads to collisions, territorial disputes, and resource conflicts. Or it leads to independence, said quietly, which is what really bothers you, isn't it? She moved to the next charge before anyone could respond. Dimensional research. Yes, we conducted experiments with quantum-level reality manipulation at Nova Kyoto. This technology is prohibited by Council law. Do you know what else is prohibited? Research into artificial intelligence, research into genetic enhancement, research into antimatter weapons, research into temporal mechanics. The list of prohibited research areas is 73 items long. 73 entire fields of science that the Council has declared off-limits. The hologram changed again, showing a massive document with highlighted sections. I read through all 73 prohibitions. You know what I noticed? Every single one of them could lead to technology that might challenge Council authority. AI could make independent decisions without Council oversight. Genetic enhancement could create species that don't fit your classification systems. Antimatter weapons could threaten Council installations. You don't prohibit dangerous research. You prohibit independent research. These prohibitions exist because such research has proven destructive in the past, an arbiter said coldly. The Empire nearly destroyed itself with artificial intelligence. The civilization collapsed after genetic warfare. We learned from these disasters. You learned to be afraid, said, and you decided that fear should be universal law, but humans, we're still learning, we're still experimenting, we're still trying to understand the universe. And yes, sometimes that means we break things. Sometimes that means we fail, but that's how progress happens. She pulled up a star chart now, showing the 14 restricted zones where humanity had established colonies. These territories, protected zones you call them, I looked into each one. This one was designated protected because an extinct species used to live there. They've been gone for 2,000 years, but the Council maintains the territory as a memorial. This one is protected because of unique mineral deposits that might be useful someday, though no one has mined them in 8 centuries. This one is protected because it's considered aesthetically significant. His voice rose with passion. These are habitable worlds, places where people could live, could build, could thrive, but they sit empty because the Council decided they should be preserved. Meanwhile, humanity is running out of room. 8 billion people on Earth and are is straining. We need space to grow. We need new worlds. So yes, we colonized restricted territories. We didn't ask permission because we knew you'd say no. The law applies to all species equally, an arbiter intoned. You do not have special privilege to ignore restrictions simply because they inconvenience you. I'm not asking for special privilege, said. I'm pointing out that your laws are designed to maintain the status, to keep things exactly as they are, to prevent change. She took a breath, steadying herself for what came next. Which brings me to the 18th charge, the Devourers. The chamber went absolutely silent. Even the ambient sounds of breathing and movement ceased. Every being present was listening now. Yes, we made contact with the Devourers. 3 colony ships, 1,000 volunteers went into the Void Zone 8 months ago. They knew they wouldn't come back. They went anyway. Hands tightened on the podium. But it wasn't reckless. It wasn't ignorant. We knew exactly what we were doing. She pulled up a new set of files, and the chamber's silence deepened as representatives recognized what they were seeing. Council files. Classified records that humanity should never have been able to access. Our dimensional research at Nova Kyoto wasn't just about developing new technology. It was about understanding the structure of reality itself. And in the process, we discovered something interesting. The Devourers aren't random. They don't consume galaxies at random. They follow a pattern. The hologram displayed a timeline showing 63 civilizations over 12,000 years, each one marked with a date and location. Every 200 years, approximately, a species that the Council considers problematic encounters the Devourers. It's remarkably consistent. Species that are too aggressive, too independent, too curious. They get steered, very carefully and subtly, into Devourer territory, and then they disappear. The chamber erupted in absolute chaos. Representatives were shouting, demanding explanations, calling a liar. The arbiters pulsed with brilliant red light, but for the first time in memory, they couldn't restore order immediately. When silence finally returned, it was heavy and dangerous. One of the arbiters spoke, and its voice carried a threat. You present classified information, information your species obtained illegally. This is itself a violation. I present the truth, said. The Council doesn't contain the Devourers. You feed them. You've been doing it for 12,000 years. You sacrifice species to buy peace. This is absurd, a representative bellowed, its massive form rising from its seat. The arbiters would never. Look at the data, interrupted, her voice cutting through the noise. I've highlighted the pattern. Every species that was fed to the Devourers had something in common. They challenged Council authority. They pursued prohibited research. They expanded beyond their designated territories. They were, in Council terms, problematic. She pulled up specific examples. The Empire, after they refused to abandon AI research. The Confederacy, after they developed independent FTL. The Shen Collective, after they began establishing colonies outside Council space. All of them mysteriously encountered the Devourers within a decade of their violations. All of them were destroyed. An arbiter's voice boomed through the chamber, louder than before. You accuse this council of murder, of genocide. This is slander of the highest order. I accuse you of pragmatism, said quietly. I understand why you did it. The Devourers are a threat that can't be fought conventionally. They exist partially outside our dimension. They consume matter, energy, and even information. Fighting them directly would be suicide, so you made a deal. You give them tribute and they leave the rest of the galaxy alone. It's logical. It's even moral from a certain perspective. Sacrifice a few to save many. She paused, letting the weight of that settle. But humanity was next on the list, wasn't it? We hit our 18th violation. We fit the pattern perfectly. So you were going to guide us into the void zone the same way you guided the others. Let the Devourers solve your human problem. The Council makes no deals with the Devourers, an arbiter insisted. They are a force of nature, not rational entities. Maybe they were once, agreed. But they learned. Over 12,000 years, they learned that if they stay away from council space and only consume what you feed them, nobody bothers them. It's not a formal deal. It's an understanding, an arrangement. She looked directly at the arbiters now. But humanity figured it out. We decoded the pattern. We saw what was coming. So those 3 colony ships, they weren't reckless. They weren't suicidal. They were a message. The hologram changed, showing battle telemetry from the colony ship's final moments. The data was fragmentary, corrupted by dimensional distortion, but clear enough to follow. 3 ships entering the void zone, 3 ships detecting devourer presence, 3 ships opening fire with weapons that shouldn't have existed. We brought dimensional disruption charges, said. Weapons derived from our prohibited research. Weapons designed specifically to hurt things that exist partially outside our reality. The ships were destroyed, yes, but the devourers took damage, real damage. For the first time in recorded history, they retreated. The chamber was utterly silent now. Representatives stared at the data, trying to understand what they were seeing. We can fight them, said simply. They're not invincible. They're not unstoppable. They're just dangerous. And humanity has spent its entire existence learning how to fight dangerous things. A representative stood, its skin shifting through rapid color changes that indicated deep distress. If what you say is true, if the devourers can be hurt, then why has the council never attempted to fight them? Met this gaze. Because fighting requires risk. It requires sacrifice. It requires the possibility of failure. The council doesn't do those things anymore. You've built a civilization based on safety and stability and order. You've eliminated risk so thoroughly that you've eliminated progress too. She turned back to address the full assembly. Look at yourselves. 847 species, and what have you accomplished in the last 1,000 years? I've studied your technological development, your scientific publications, your cultural achievements. Everything has been stagnant for centuries. You discover nothing new. You build nothing revolutionary. You create nothing that challenges the existing order. We have achieved harmony, an arbiter said. We have ended the conflicts that plagued this galaxy before the council was formed. Species no longer war with each other. Resources are distributed fairly. All civilizations live in peace. You've achieved stagnation, countered. You've created a garden where nothing grows too tall or spreads too far. Every species that joins the council becomes domesticated. You welcome them, you integrate them, and slowly, gradually, you tame them. Dangerous research gets prohibited. Aggressive expansion gets restricted. Independent thought gets discouraged. And within a few generations, they're just like everyone else. Safe, controlled, empty. She could see anger in many faces now, but also something else. Uncertainty, recognition. Some of the representatives were looking at each other, seeing themselves reflected in her words. Humanity doesn't want that future, said. We don't want to be safe if it means we can't grow. We don't want order if it means we can't explore. We don't want your protection if it means we have to give up everything that makes us who we are. Then you will face the consequences of your choices, an arbiter declared. The verdict stands. Humanity is guilty of 18 violations of the Accord. The species will be dissolved according to council law. Nodded slowly. I understand. You've made your decision according to your rules, but I want everyone here to understand what this means. You're not punishing us for breaking laws. You're punishing us for refusing to be tamed. She looked up at the arbiters one last time. And I want you to know that we won't submit quietly. You can take our technology. You can scatter our colonies. You can try to erase our culture. But you can't erase what we've proven. The devourers can be hurt. The council's laws aren't absolute. And there's another way to live in this galaxy. Your hour is complete, an arbiter said. You may return to your vessel. The execution of this judgment will begin within one standard cycle. Bowed slightly, not in submission but in acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked toward the chamber exit, her footsteps echoing in the silence. But before she reached the door, something unexpected happened. A representative stood and spoke clearly. "I formally object to this verdict." The arbiters pulsed with surprise. "You object." "The collective formally objects to the dissolution of humanity," the representative repeated. "We request a full council vote on this matter." Another representative stood, this one from the Crystalline Assembly. "We second this objection. We also request a vote." Then another stood, and another. Within minutes, representatives from dozens of species were on their feet, voices overlapping as they called for reconsideration, for votes, for debate. The chamber descended into chaos. Stopped at the doorway and turned back, watching. The arbiters were pulsing rapidly, their light flickering between colors. They were conferring with each other, trying to restore order, but the representatives wouldn't quiet down. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Council had operated on consensus. The arbiters made decisions, and those decisions were accepted without question. Disagreement was rare. Formal objection was almost unheard of. Open defiance was impossible. Until now. A young in its mobility sphere rolled up beside. It was one of the species' junior diplomats, barely old enough to hold the position. "Is it true," they asked quietly, "what you said about the Devourers, about the Council?" "Yes," said. "Then they're going to kill you for saying it." "Probably." This bioluminescence pulsed with an emotion couldn't identify. "My grandmother told me stories about the old days before we joined the council, when explored freely and weren't afraid to take risks. I always thought they were just stories, exaggerations." It paused. "But maybe they were memories." Smiled slightly. "Maybe they were." "What will you do now?" "I don't know. Wait for the council's enforcement ships, I suppose. Make a final report to Earth. Say goodbye to my family." She looked back at the chaotic chamber. "Hope that something I said today matters." There was quiet for a moment. Then it said something that surprised her. "It already does." The attempt to restore order took another 20 minutes. When the arbiters finally managed to quiet the assembly, their announcement was brief and strained. "Due to unprecedented procedural objections, the execution of judgment against humanity is delayed pending review. This council is adjourned." Made her way back through the corridors of the Nexus station, no longer escorted. She passed representatives from various species, and many of them stopped to look at her. A few nodded. One even spoke a word of what might have been encouragement in a language she didn't recognize. Her shuttle was where she'd left it, undisturbed. She climbed aboard and initiated departure procedures, watching through the viewport as the Nexus station grew smaller behind her. Her communication system chimed. Incoming message, priority encrypted, source unknown. She hesitated, then opened it. The message was simple: coordinates for a location in unclaimed space, a time for a meeting 2 days from now, and a list of names, 218 species that wanted to talk privately, away from council oversight. Stared at the message for a long time, then she set a course. The meeting place was a dead system, a red dwarf with no habitable planets and no resources worth claiming. It was the kind of place that appeared on star charts but was never visited, perfect for a clandestine gathering. Shuttle arrived first, emerging from hyperspace 3 hours before the scheduled meeting time. She used the extra time to scan the system thoroughly, checking for council monitoring devices or hidden ships. She found nothing. The system was exactly as advertised, empty and forgotten. Ships began arriving in ones and twos as the meeting time approached. They came from different directions, using different types of FTL travel, clearly trying to avoid being tracked as a group. Counted them as they appeared. Small diplomatic vessels mostly, carrying single representatives or small delegations. By the time the meeting was scheduled to begin, 47 ships had gathered, floating in loose formation around shuttle. A communication channel opened, connecting all the ships. Ambassador, a familiar voice said. It was the who had first objected in the council chamber. Thank you for coming. We weren't certain you would. You sent me an encrypted message asking for a secret meeting away from council oversight, said. That's either very brave or very stupid. I had to find out which. Perhaps both, the admitted. My name is, I speak for a coalition of species who found your words compelling. We've been discussing them since the council adjourned. 218 species objected to the verdict, said. I only count 47 ships here. Many were afraid to come, another voice said. This one belonged to a crystalline, its translated voice carrying a crystalline chime. Council monitoring is extensive. Those of us here took significant risks to avoid detection. Others wanted to come but couldn't justify the suspicion it would create. Why did you come? Asked. Why risk it? There was a long pause, then spoke again. Because you asked a question in that chamber about first contact with hostile intelligence, and I realized I didn't have an answer. I'm 430 years old, Ambassador. I've studied history extensively, but I had to look up the details of our first contact with the Empire. I had forgotten. We've been in the Council for 4,000 years, and we've forgotten what it was like to face real danger. My people discovered FTL travel 3,200 years ago, a new voice added. Checked her display and saw it came from a. We were explorers, adventurers. We mapped unknown space and made first contact with 17 species before we ever heard of the Council. Now we barely leave our home systems. We rely on Council hyperspace lanes for everything. I had to search the archives to find out what our ships used to look like. More voices joined in, representatives from different species sharing similar stories. Civilizations that had once been bold, aggressive, curious. Now they were careful, cautious, comfortable. They followed the rules. They stayed within their boundaries. They didn't ask dangerous questions. The Council gave us peace, said. That's not a small thing. Before the Council, our region of space was in constant conflict. Wars destroyed entire civilizations. The death toll was staggering. When the Arbiters offered membership, offered protection and stability, we were grateful, and we still are, but prompted. But I watched the Council chamber today, continued. I watched 847 species sit in silence while the Arbiters announced they were going to dissolve your civilization, and most of them seemed satisfied with that judgment. Some even seemed pleased, and I realized something. We're not grateful anymore. We're compliant. There's a difference. The crystalline spoke again. You said we've achieved stagnation. That hit hard. The crystalline assembly used to be known for our scientific breakthroughs. We developed quantum computing, gravity manipulation, antimatter containment. Now we haven't published a significant new discovery in 800 years. We maintain what we have. We refine existing technology, but we don't innovate. I never questioned that until today. What exactly do you want from me? Asked. Or from humanity? We've been convicted. Our sentence has only been delayed, not canceled. We're not in a position to help anyone. We want to understand, said. Your claims about the Devourers, about the Council feeding them problematic species. Is that really true, or was it speculation designed to create doubt? Considered her response carefully. These species had risked detection to meet with her. They deserved honesty. It's true, we have the data, we can prove it. But I should warn you, if the Council finds out you're asking these questions, you might end up on the sacrifice list too. Show us, the crystalline said. We're already here, we've already taken the risk. Show us the proof. Transmitted the files. All of them. The complete analysis humanity had done of Council records, the pattern recognition algorithms, the timeline of civilizations that had encountered the Devourers. She included the classified documents they'd accessed during their dimensional research, showing how Council long-range sensors had tracked the sacrificed species right up until they entered Devourer territory. The channel fell silent as the representatives reviewed the data, waited, watching the stars through her viewport. She wondered if this was a mistake, If these species would take this information back to the Council, use it to curry favor, prove their loyalty by exposing humanity's espionage. Finally spoke again. His voice was different now, harder. The Shen Collective, I knew them. They were our neighbors for 2,000 years, good people, peaceful. Their only crime was developing a new type of FTL drive that didn't require hyperspace lanes. And the Council, he trailed off. Steered them into the void zone, finished. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, said. Be right. Tell me you're right about the other thing. Tell me the Devourers can actually be fought. They can, said. I won't lie to you, it's dangerous, extremely dangerous. Those 3 colony ships that went into the void zone, everyone aboard died, but they proved it's possible. The Devourers took damage. They retreated. They can be hurt. What did the ships use? The crystalline asked. What kind of weapons? Dimensional disruption charges. They're derived from research into quantum-level reality manipulation, the kind of research the Council prohibits. Paused. We can share the specifications, if you want them. That would make us violators too, a voice rumbled. Subject to the same penalties you're facing. Yes, agreed, it would. Another long silence. Then the spoke. How many ships would it take to hurt them badly enough to make a difference? We don't know, admitted. Our analysis suggests that a sustained assault with 100 ships equipped with dimensional disruption technology might be enough to drive them back permanently. But it's just a guess. We've only tested it once. 100 ships, repeated. That's a significant commitment. It's more than that, said. It's a declaration. The Council will know immediately what you're doing. They'll move to stop you. You'll face the same judgment we're facing. Maybe worse, since you'd be knowingly defying them after our example. And if we do nothing, the crystalline asked. If we return to Council space, report this meeting, and continue as loyal members. Then nothing changes, said. The Council continues as it has for 10,000 years. Species continue to be sacrificed when they become problematic. The Devourers remain a threat that nobody fights. And eventually, maybe in a century or maybe in a millennium, your species will do something that puts you on the list too. That's not much of a choice, said Riley. No, agreed, it's not. The channel filled with crosstalk as the representatives began debating among themselves. Some argued for returning to the Council, insisting that working within the system was the only viable path. Others wanted to share the dimensional disruption technology immediately, start building weapons, prepare for confrontation. A few suggested that might be manipulating them, that this could all be an elaborate human trick. Let them argue. This had to be their decision. She had said what she came to say. The rest was up to them. Eventually called for order. Ambassador, if we decided to act, if we decided to build ships with dimensional disruption weapons and take them into the void zone, would humanity join us? Our sentence hasn't been carried out yet, said carefully. But it will be, probably within a few months. The Council is gathering enforcement vessels right now. They'll come to our colonies, impound our ships, begin the dissolution process. If we resist, they'll use force. That's not what I asked, said. I asked if you would join us. Smiled, though no one could see it. Humanity has been fighting since we first discovered fire. Fighting predators, fighting each other, fighting the universe itself. We're not very good at surrender. So yes, if you build those ships and head into the void zone, we'll be right there with you. Even though it means certain death. Those 3 colony ships that started all this, we have a memorial for them back on Earth. It's a simple stone monument with all 1,000 names carved into it. At the bottom, there's an inscription. It says, "They went into the dark so that others might see light." That's humanity in a nutshell. We'll die for a purpose if we have to. The crystalline made a sound that its translator interpreted as laughter. You're either the bravest species in the galaxy or the most insane. Why not both, said. More discussion followed. Some species committed immediately. Others wanted time to consult with their governments. A few admitted they couldn't participate directly but offered to provide resources or intelligence. They had industrial capacity. They had advanced sensor technology. They had experience with covert operations from their pre-council days. By the time the meeting ended, 47 species had formed an alliance. It wasn't large, not compared to the council's 847 members, but it was a start. "We'll need to coordinate carefully," said. "The council will be watching all of us now. Any unusual activity will draw attention." "Then we don't hide," said. "We build the ships openly. We call it a joint scientific research project. The council doesn't prohibit cooperation between members, just prohibited research. By the time they figure out what we're actually building, it'll be too late to stop us." "That's insane," I said. "Probably," agreed. "But it might work. The council has spent 10,000 years assuming everyone follows the rules. They're not prepared for defiance. We use that." The meeting broke up after another hour of planning. Ships departed in the same staggered pattern they'd arrived, heading back to their home systems. Waited until the last one had jumped to hyperspace before setting her own course back to Earth. She needed to tell her people what was coming. The Council's enforcement fleet would arrive in a matter of months. Humanity needed to prepare. Not to fight the Council directly, that would be suicide, but to build the ships they'd need for the Void Zone, to train crews, to get ready for the mission that might save them or destroy them completely. The journey back took 3 days. Spent most of it writing reports, compiling data, preparing briefings. She also sent encrypted messages to the other 46 species, coordinating their next steps. It was delicate work. One mistake, one intercepted transmission, and the Council would shut them down before they could accomplish anything. She thought about what she'd started, about the fracture she'd created in a civilization that had been stable for 10,000 years. Part of her felt guilty about that. The Council had brought peace to countless species. It had ended wars, prevented conflicts, saved lives. But it had also become a trap. A beautiful, comfortable trap that slowly strangled every civilization that entered it, and couldn't accept that future for humanity. When she finally arrived back at Earth, she found the planet in chaos. News of the Council's verdict had reached home. Protests filled the streets of major cities. Some people demanded that humanity submit to the Council's judgment peacefully. Others called for armed resistance. The government was split, paralyzed by indecision. Went straight to Geneva, to the headquarters of Earth's diplomatic corps. She presented her findings to the Security Council in a closed session that lasted 8 hours. She showed them the data about the Devourers, the pattern of sacrificed species, the results from the 3 colony ships. And she told them about the Alliance, about 47 species willing to risk everything to fight back. The reaction was mixed. Some council members were excited, seeing hope where there had been none. Others were terrified, convinced that had just guaranteed humanity's destruction. The debate went on for days. In the end, though, the decision was made. Earth would proceed with the plan. They would build the ships. They would develop the weapons. And when the time came, they would go into the Void Zone. The next 6 months were the busiest of life. She coordinated with the allied species, sharing technology and resources. She oversaw the construction of 50 human vessels designed specifically for dimensional combat. She trained with the crews who would fly those ships into battle. The Council's enforcement fleet arrived on schedule, exactly 6 months after the verdict. 300 ships, more than enough to force Earth's submission. But they found something unexpected. Humanity's entire military fleet was in orbit around Earth, but they weren't preparing for battle. Instead, they were conducting what appeared to be peaceful exercises. When the Council Enforcement Commander demanded Earth's surrender, the human response was polite but firm. "We acknowledge the Council's verdict," Earth's representative said. "We will comply with the dissolution order, but we request a delay of 1 year to prepare our population for the transition. This is permitted under Council Law, Article 47, Section 3. The enforcement commander consulted the legal texts and confirmed that this was technically true. Species facing dissolution could request up to 1 standard year to manage the transition. It was a formality that had rarely been used, but it was legally binding. The commander agreed to the delay, though with obvious suspicion. The enforcement fleet remained in Earth's system, watching and waiting. Watched them from Earth's surface, knowing that the clock was now ticking. They had 1 year. 1 year to finish the ships, finalize the plans, and launch the mission into the void zone. The allied species worked frantically. Construction facilities across dozens of systems ran at full capacity, building ships according to human specifications. Scientists from 47 civilizations collaborated on refining the dimensional disruption technology. Military personnel trained together, learning to coordinate across vastly different species and combat doctrines. It was the largest joint operation in galactic history that didn't involve the Council, and somehow they managed to keep it secret. The Council knew something was happening. They weren't blind, but the sheer audacity of the plan made it hard for them to believe. Why would 47 species commit resources to helping a condemned civilization? It didn't make sense according to Council logic. 8 months into the delay, the ships were ready. 150 vessels in total, 50 from humanity and 100 from the allied species. They were sleek, deadly things, built for one specific purpose. Each one carried dimensional disruption charges and enough firepower to hurt something that existed partially outside reality. The crews gathered at a secret staging area in deep space, far from any Council presence. Was there, commanding one of the human ships. She'd insisted on it despite protests from Earth's government. This was her mission, her responsibility. She would see it through personally. Was there too, commanding the contingent. The crystalline assembly had sent their best ships. They brought their massive warships. Even the small vessels looked formidable, bristling with weapons they hadn't used in thousands of years. They gathered in formation, all 150 ships, and prepared to jump to the void zone. Before they left, opened a channel to all vessels. "I won't lie to you," she said. "Many of us won't come back from this. Maybe none of us will. The Devourers are the most dangerous thing in the known galaxy, but they're not invincible. We proved that, and today we're going to prove it again." She paused, looking at the display showing all the ships. So many species, so many people willing to risk everything. The Council will call this reckless. They'll say we threw our lives away for nothing. But they're wrong. We're not dying for nothing. We're dying so that the next generation doesn't have to live in fear. We're dying so that civilization can grow again instead of stagnating. We're dying so that someone somewhere will remember that there's another way. All ships prepare to jump. Target coordinates locked. On my mark. She took one last look at the star field, at the galaxy they were fighting to save. Then she gave the order. Jump. 150 ships vanished from normal space, entering the hyperspace corridor that led to the void zone. The journey would take 3 hours. 3 hours to prepare. 3 hours to say goodbye to the universe they knew. Spent the time reviewing tactical data and making final preparations. But in quiet moments, she thought about Earth, about her family, who she'd said goodbye to months ago, about the 8 billion people back home who were counting on this mission to work. They emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the void zone. The space here looked wrong. Reality itself seemed thin, like fabric stretched too tight. Sensors went haywire, detecting things that shouldn't exist. And in the distance, they could see the Devourers. They were massive, incomprehensibly large, shapes that hurt to look at directly. They existed in multiple dimensions at once, their true forms extending into spaces that human minds couldn't process. The sensors described them as tiers in reality, wounds in the fabric of spacetime that consumed everything they touched. All ships battle formation, ordered, her voice steady despite the fear trying to claw its way up her throat. Armed dimensional disruption charges, prepare to engage. The fleet spread out, each ship taking its designated position. They'd practiced this formation dozens of times, but never against actual devourers, never with their lives actually on the line. The devourers noticed them, noticed and began to move. They flowed through space like liquid darkness, impossible and terrifying. First wave, fire on my mark, said, watching the targeting data scroll across her displays. 3, 2, 1 mark. 50 ships fired simultaneously. Dimensional disruption charges streaked through space, weapons designed to hurt things that shouldn't be able to be hurt. They impacted the nearest devourer and the creature screamed. Not with sound, there was no air in space, but with something that bypassed physics entirely and struck directly at consciousness. Every person in every ship felt that scream, felt the devourer's pain and rage. Some crew members collapsed. A few ships lost control briefly before their backup pilots took over. But the devourer was damaged, visibly, measurably damaged. Parts of its impossible form were dissolving, unable to maintain cohesion. "It works," his voice came over the fleet channel, filled with awe. "By the stars, it actually works." Second wave, fire, ordered, not allowing herself to celebrate yet. "Keep the pressure on, don't let them adapt." The battle that followed lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of the most intense combat anyone in the fleet had ever experienced. The devourers fought back with weapons that description. They reached through dimensions to attack ships directly, bypassing shields and armor. They consumed matter and energy, turning allied vessels into nothing with a touch. Humanity lost 17 ships in the first hour. The allied species lost 23. The casualties were devastating, but they kept fighting, kept firing those dimensional disruption charges, kept hurting the devourers. And slowly, impossibly, they started winning. The devourers began to retreat. Not fleeing exactly. They were too alien for human concepts like fear or retreat. But they pulled back, withdrawing from the void zone's edge, returning to whatever deeper darkness they came from. By the time the battle ended, 74 ships remained. Half the fleet lost, thousands of people dead. The survivors were exhausted, traumatized, barely able to function. But they had done it. They had fought the devourers and driven them back. Opened a channel to all ships. All vessels withdraw to safe distance. Begin damage assessment and medical triage. Well done, all of you. She slumped in her command chair, letting the tension drain from her body. They'd survived. Against all odds, against something that had consumed 63 civilizations over 12,000 years, they'd survived. And they'd proven that the Council was wrong. The journey back took a week. The fleet couldn't use standard hyperspace lanes. The Council controlled those. Instead, they used the experimental FTL drives humanity had been developing, jumping between systems using methods the Council didn't monitor. When they finally arrived at the secret staging area, they found it surrounded by Council enforcement vessels. 300 ships, the same fleet that had been orbiting Earth. They'd figured out what was happening, and they were waiting. His heart sank. They'd won the battle against the devourers, only to face destruction at the hands of their own civilization. But then something unexpected happened. The Council fleet didn't attack. Instead, a communication channel opened. It was the enforcement commander, and his voice carried something had never heard from a Council representative before. Uncertainty. "Ambassador," the commander said, "we received telemetry from your engagement with the devourers, all of it. The Council has been debating what it means." "And what have they decided?" asked. "They haven't. For the first time in 10,000 years, the arbiters are divided. The Council is in chaos. Half the member species are demanding your immediate destruction for defying the verdict. The other half are demanding answers about the Devourers. Your 47 allies have officially withdrawn from the Council. 300 more species are threatening to do the same unless reforms are enacted. Process that, so what happens now? I don't know, the commander admitted. I was sent here to enforce a verdict, but that verdict was based on laws that assumed the Devourers couldn't be fought. You proved that assumption wrong. Everything is changing. He paused. I'm not authorized to say this, but personally, thank you. My species was on the list. 70 years from now, according to the pattern you discovered, the Council was going to feed us to the Devourers. You saved us. The channel closed. The enforcement fleet continued to surround them, but they didn't attack. They just waited. Everyone just waited. 2 days later, the message came. Not from the Council, but from the 218 species who had objected to humanity's dissolution. They'd formed their own organization. They called it the Alliance for Progress, and they invited humanity to be a founding member. Read the message 3 times, hardly daring to believe it. The Galactic Council had controlled civilization for 10,000 years. And now, because one human had spoken, because 47 species had dared to fight, because 74 ships had survived the impossible, everything was changing. The galaxy would never be the same. Wars might come. Conflicts certainly would. The stability of the Council era was gone, but so was the stagnation, so was the fear, so was the cage. Looked at her crew, at the humans and aliens who had fought together and survived together. She thought about the 3 colony ships that had started all this, about the 1,000 names carved on a memorial back on Earth. They went into the dark so that others might see light. One human spoke at the Council. Silence followed, and then the galaxy learned to speak again.